Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We are live from Books and Books here in Coral Gables with thanks to the Knight Foundation for their generous support. Just a reminder to our internet audience, for those of you watching that would like to get a copy tonight's book signed by the author, we can do that for you. If you call the number that's on your screen, we'll get a book autograph for you. And free of charge for the shipping, we'll send it to you anywhere in the United States. And for those of you that are here, please don't forget to silence your cell phones and also check out our Books and Books newsletter and our webpage, booksandbooks.com. You can give us your email address so we can alert you to everything that goes on here at the store. You can also visit us on Facebook and Twitter. Tonight, we are very happy to have with us Ms. Uva de Aragón and her book, The Memory of Silence, or Memoria de Silencio. I would like to acknowledge also tonight's event is being presented in cooperation with the FIU's Cuban Research Institute. And to that end, to introduce Ms. de Aragón and her moderator tonight, Professor Jeffrey Barnett from Washington and Lee University. Please give a warm welcome to the director of the Cuban Research Institute, Mr. George Duane.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. As always, it's a great pleasure to partner with Books and Books to bring the best authors in Cuban and Cuban-American topics to Miami. I'd also like to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of this event by FIU's English Department and Excel Studies program. And in fact, today we had a very interesting and thought-provoking panel discussion with the translator and Professor Erika Maid Freixas, who served as moderator. And it's also a very special pleasure to introduce tonight's guest writer, my good friend and colleague, Uva de Aragón. Dr. de Aragón is a former associate director of our institute, worked there for many years, and she was extremely supportive when I came to CRI in 2012, helped us to organize the 9th conference, which she had organized for many years before. So I'm extremely grateful for that. She supposedly retired in 2011, but has continued to write, to publish, to travel widely. And last year, to top it off, she successfully produced a theatrical version of her novel, The Memory of Silence, in Venezuela, in Chile, and here in Miami. Uva has published a dozen books of essays, poetry, and short stories. Her works have appeared in anthologies and literary magazines in Spain and the United States, as well as Cuba. Her novel, Memoria del Silencio, was first published in 2012, and tonight we're presenting the English translation as The Memory of Silence. She now writes an op-ed column for El Nuevo Herald and publishes the very interesting blog Habana Era Soy. She previously served as associate editor of Cuban Studies, which is the leading academic journal on Cuba and its diaspora, founded by Dr. Carmelo Mesalago, who's also present tonight. Uva earned her PhD in Latin American and Spanish literature from the University of Miami. We're also very fortunate to have with us tonight the translator of The Memory of Silence, Dr. Jeffrey Barnett, professor of Romance languages and also the head of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies program at Washington and Lee University. Jeffrey holds a PhD in Spanish American literature from the University of Kentucky, a master's degree in bilingual education and history from the Sam Houston State University, and a BA in history and Spanish from Abilene Christian University. He teaches courses on Spanish language, Spanish American literature, and culture, and his articles on these topics and comparative literary studies have appeared in journals in Spain, Latin America, and the United States. He has already translated several well-known Latin American authors, including Carlos Fuentes, and his book-length translations include The Memory of Silence and a forthcoming volume of poetry, Flocks, by Cuban author Surelis Lopez Amaya. We welcome Professor Barnett and his wife as well, who drove, I think it was 13 hours to come here with us tonight, so special welcome to both of you. So without further ado, please help me welcome Uva de Aragón.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, but I'm going to defer to my translator to speak first, and then I will.
Speak from here.
Oh, okay. Then.
Actually, I'm active. Yeah,
we have microphones. I think we can speak.
That's that way we can't get away with any secrets. We're all mic'd up. What an honor to be here. I don't say that as a platitude. An honor. First of all, this is a night that's been in the coming for many, many years. I'm so grateful to be here with my wife, my best editor, reader, one who gives me great suggestions, and of course, Uva. This has all begun and end with you, and rightfully so. When I say it's been a long road getting here, on a trip to Cuba in 2000, I was flipping through an anthology called Estados de Sal, And I thought, well, this is a pretty interesting story. This story by this Uva de Aragón, I did not know. It's a story called No Puedo Más, and I thought, well, I'll deal with this story later. And I was teaching a literature and translation course later, and I wanted to use that. Another story that I had found that I really like a lot, Ni la verdad ni mentira, not the truth, not a lie. And I thought, let me see if I can vet out some of my ideas about the story, and I thought, how am I going to find the email of this person who lives in Cuba? And I found her address, and it was an FIU address, and I thought, oh, I better readjust all my thinking about this story. We began to correspond, but as I explained in my foreword, what a wonderful mistake I had made, because in Estatuas de Sal, Uva is presented not as a Cuban American, not as a Cuban exile, but simply a Cuban writer, one who deems Cuba to be much greater than a geopolitical entity, one that deals with Cuba as a culture, a patria, one that is much larger than any polemic that we deal with. So it was a wonderful error that I discovered. She went on to later tell me I had no idea that she didn't tell me I was wrong in my article I was writing. She said I did not have that in mind. So that gave me full green light to go ahead with that article. So we began to correspond, and we've since had a wonderful relationship throughout this whole process. And one that it's been a collaborative experience, because one that I won't talk about the art of translation, that's in the foreword, but obviously I couldn't have done this work without her. Instead, what we'd like to do tonight is give you some samplings of the diversity of the readings. And I've chosen a few that, and I'll explain why as I go through, but I want to briefly hit some of the ones that are in English, then we'll turn it over to Uva, the star of the show. What I would like to do, first of all, I think if you're familiar with the work, you already know, or if you've heard about the work and read reviews, you already know that it is a novel of multiple voices, of multiplicity. There isn't an authorial voice, there isn't even one narrator, there are multiple narrators, and there are many voices. And part of the challenge that I had was trying to find the right tenor for these voices. And so I've chosen 3 distinct passages that I think illustrate the problems that I had to deal with because of you in a wonderful way. Over the next few minutes I'll read, this is a novel that includes over 70 to 80 instances of what I deem realia, authentic texts, newspaper articles, poems, songs, an aria, lullabies, and so I had to adjust my voice to each one of those. So the first one I will read starts out, this is in chapter 3, so we've already met Menchu in the first chapter, we've then met Lauri in the second chapter, and now we're back to Havana with Menchu. And rather than easing us into the chapter, it's, for lack of it's not lack of a better word, it is the right word. This is a bombastic excerpt from Bohemia. Meant to get our attention that we are right in the thick of things. So I hope I captured the tone of the Bohemia article, and then we move right into Menchu's somewhat introspective thoughts that are occurring at the time. So this is the first page and a half of chapter 3, entitled Fidel, Fidel. Remember, this is very bombastic, so forgive me if I'm melodramatic here at the beginning. It is the afternoon of the 26th of July. The civic square bustles and boils over with people. 500,000 Cubans from the countryside and as many from Havana mingle in the enormous esplanade. The open space is a sea of hats and of machetes held high against the blue sky. The tropical sun lights up Marti's statue and obelisk. It generously bathes the human contingent and radiates off the buildings nearby. On the terrace of the National Library stand the leaders of the revolution and the foreign dignitaries. 2 gargantuan hands on which a dove perches momentarily bear the symbolic 26. To the side, the national flag furls in the wind. Raul Castro, always combative, speaks. Everyone here needs to come to order because the people are in the plaza. The best army the Republic can count on is the one in front of us right now. There is great suspense in the air. From the stage, someone directly addresses the masses. I would like to take this uproar that is bursting forth from all parties and change it into a question that I put directly before you, the people. Do you or do you not want Fidel to continue heading the government? A million voices answer in unison, sí. Next comes the acclamation of a líder máximo, the maximum leader, Fidel, Fidel, Fidel. And the hats thrown into the air, Fidel, Fidel. And the brandishing of the machetes, Fidel, Fidel. And the ovations, Fidel. And the impetuous movement of the sea of people. These acts and others confirm that it is the will of the Cuban people and the people alone. The people have spoken and have ordered Fidel to fulfill his obligation. Bohemia. I'm empty inside. As if all my organs had been taken out. As if this woman who gets up, showers, eats, drinks, talks, studies, walks, goes to bed, and gets up again were a robot, stripped of her memories. Her dreams or aspirations. No, it's worse than that. If there were only emptiness inside me, I wouldn't feel anything. What's really happened is that I've been split in two. My other half left with Lauri. My life was truncated. My soul is like a stump, like a huge bloody stump with big chunks of unhealed pieces that they keep picking at. Attending the university is an act of sheer will. Lauri and I had dreams about the day that we would climb those famous steps together. I feel like I'm stealing part of her life, like that this doesn't belong to me alone. I can barely concentrate on my studies the way I should. At times it seems like the only thing we do is listen to Fidel's long speeches. They go on for hours and hours. I ride the bus and Fidel is speaking. I get home and Fidel is speaking. We have dinner and Fidel is speaking. I go out on the front porch and Fidel is speaking. I go to bed and Fidel is speaking. Papa turns off the TV and Fidel is still speaking. The next door neighbor turns off the radio and Fidel is still speaking. I go to sleep and Fidel is still speaking. Although I always hear it, I don't always listen. When I do, sometimes things become clear. Other times, however, he appears to go round and round the same issue and always says the same thing. And finally winds up saying nothing. Still, he must be saying something because the next morning everyone asks, "Did you hear Fidel?" As if it had been the most important thing in the world. My friend Lázaro thinks that Fidel Castro is some kind of messiah. Once Fidel showed up at the university. He wanted the students to vote for a guy named Cubelas for president of the Federation of University Students. He was there talking to the students all night long until the next morning. When Lázaro told me about it, his eyes lit up and became very small. I don't know why, but it scared me. That's a passage that gives you the idea of this lyrical that's juxtaposed with the journalistic. That was tough.
Sorry.
I'll move on to actually, this is one of the first passages I translated because I wanted to see if I could do it. This is a beautiful poetic passage, quite different than that bombastic Bohemia article. This is one that I like for many reasons. One, the poetry, but I also like this. At this point, Menchu is now in the countryside. This is the beginning of the literacy campaign, and she's gone out in the country to begin teaching children to read. And one reason why I like it not only is because of the poetry, but I think all of us who read Cuban literature will realize will agree that that's maybe a euphemism. It's really not Cuban literature. So often it's Havana literature. That it's very Havana-centric. And I love the fact that here we have a beautiful description outside of Havana in the countryside, which I think is a unique treat. Chapter 5, within 100 years, there will be no greater honor. The highway that leads down to the valley snakes its way through the steep mountains. Far below the windy road, the rounded dome-like hills, the mogotes, look like herds of elephants. Some stand alone, others are linked together, all in never-ending rows making their way to the circus. From the scenic lookout, you can take in the entire valley as it spreads out and extends beyond the edge of the earth. What an unbelievable sight. The Sierra stretches out from one side of the horizon to the other, while the Pizarras mountain hide behind a covering of piney forest. Down below, the verdant crops blanket the valley in every possible shade of green, interrupted at times only by the yellowish gray of an occasional hut. The sight of the massive mogote stirs up a sense of uneasiness. Balanced in such a precarious way, you'd think you're about to witness a terrible catastrophe. In the highest parts A dense veil hangs from the crevices of the exposed rocks, shrouding them in a greenish black, yellow, and gray hue. Thin, creeping vines weave their designs among the treetops. A thick moss covers the edge of the boulders from which defiant wild orchids, purple, white, and violet, sprout forth abundantly. As the sun goes down, a soft murmur begins to emanate from the very core of the mountain range. It starts out as a hum that grows louder as the night goes on. It's the mysterious and marvelous night that sings its song. You can almost feel the flutter of the insects, the croaking of the frogs, the chirping of the crickets, all of which echo incessantly in soft harmony. According to the peasants, or guajiros as we call them, the iguanas start singing their melody in the evenings. A beautiful sample of her poetry. Finally, let me give you an example. Make sure I'm on the right page here. If the first is sort of the journalistic, juxtaposed with the introspective, and then the poetic, this next piece gives you an example of the political. I made the point today that slogans are very difficult to translate. And we all know, iconically, we've seen the pictures, you've seen the billboards, the slogans that are become the maxims of revolution. So in this particular passage, it's important for many reasons. One, it begins to give us insight into Menchu's thinking. Secondly, the last word that I will read is the word silence, which I think brings us right back to the memory of silence. Now, when I become very bombastic myself, if you could see the text, you'd know I'm reading in all caps. Those are the slogans, so forgive me if I become overdramatic there. And then obviously, says Menchu, there's Cuba and the revolution. I truly believe that it's a privilege to live during these times, that we're constructing the future, that my daughter will be the beneficiary of these sacrifices. But then at other times, the revolution turns into a chatty old witch that torments me. It's like we're not living our own lives. It's as if all the problems of the world, from Ho Chi Minh's death to who should be allowed to enroll in the university, had all invaded my personal space. Fidel, this is your house. As if the world could be reduced to a slogan. The 10 million are on the way. As if they were on the bus with me. We're socialists through and through, as if they were the ingredients in our casseroles. If you don't like it, lump it, just like they were sitting at the family table. The party is industrious, as if they were rifling through my daughter's clothing. Fidel, give the Yankees hell, as if they went to the bathroom with me. Wherever, however, and for whatever, Commander-in-Chief at your service, as if they had gotten under the sheets between my husband and me. Be patriotic, consume Cuban products. Sometimes I just want to shout, enough. Fatherland or death, enough. We shall overcome. All I'm asking for is silence.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here tonight. I feel Books and Books is, in a way, my home. I've done readings here before. I'm very grateful to Jorge Duanin, the Cuban Research Institute, and it's very appropriate that they sponsor this because I wrote this novel in a one-semester sabbatical while I was working for FIU. And I'm very grateful because I don't know without that sabbatical if I would have written this novel. And I'm happy to see colleagues and friends from school in Cuba, friends from my exercise class, my family, friends from many years ago, and mostly the people that I don't know. Those are always the ones that I'm most grateful when I see people that I don't know. They come just to see the writer. Well, this novel was very important for me to write because I think that everybody who left something of themselves behind, another life they could have lived. And it was important for me to put myself in the skin of a woman about my age, living in Cuba this year, so I could understand. And but we're going to do some readings. And but first I'm going to take a survey here. How many of you are of Cuban origin? Okay. All right. How many of you do not speak Spanish? All right. Okay. All right. Of those of you of Cuban origin, I want to tell you that, and I'm very, very grateful to Jeff and to have found him in my life. I always tell his wife, I'm sorry I had a child with your husband, because this is our child. And he has written a new original, and when I hear him read it, it still amazes me. And one thing I haven't told you is that passage about Pinar del Rio came from my memory of a trip I did as a child with school to those mogotes. And I don't know why, when I started to write, it came back, the smells, the flowers, the orchids, everything. That this edition, bilingual, I think I say in the author's note that I hope that it contributes to a better understanding of Cuba, but that in addition to the original education, I wish to offer this new edition to all Cuban Americans born in the United States or who came to this country very young and preferred to read in English, their first language. This is the story of their parents and grandparents, and in many ways also theirs. I especially wish to dedicate this book to my grandsons Zachary, Christian, Brandon, and Nicholas is here with us today. So I hope that you buy this book for your children. I do, because I think that it will help understand you and your stories. Now, this I'm going to read a passage when Menchu, which is a sister in Cuba, is waiting at the airport to take the plane to come to visit her sister here in Miami. This is in the first chapters. I skip here. Here we are. We're finally about to take off. My God, the heat. It's been years since I haven't been in a plane. Well, I've only flown twice in my life. The time as a girl when Papa took us all to New York, and I went to Moscow with Lázaro. Oh, the travels that Lauri and I planned when we were young. One day we were going to go to Rome, Venice, San Michel, because that novel we read we liked so much. Greece, Paris. We always dream of going to Paris. We imagine ourselves wearing elegant dresses with exotic perfumes, surrounded by handsome men. Laurita's life probably hasn't been a bed of roses either. I wonder if she ever truly found happiness with Robertico. And has she possibly gotten used to being a widow? It's all happened so fast. There's so much that we don't know about each other. We used to write all the time, I think every day even. And then later on, what happened? It's true that both countries cut off communication, but still. Again, tears came to my eyes when I looked out the window and saw the Cuban coastline growing smaller and smaller. The most beautiful land, as Columbus called it when he first laid eyes on it. Is it possible that some type of curse has been placed on Cuban because our island is so beautiful? I don't think it's false sense of pride. It's just that Cuba has a special magic that seduces you. I wonder what Lauri thinks of our country. A few letters, a telephone call now and then, and those have usually been during time of crisis. None of that's enough for two people to really know each other. When you think about it, we're practically strangers. So many years of being separated and so far away from each other. But then in only minutes, I can begin to make out Miami. There are more buildings than I expected. I feel my heart pounding in my chest. My legs are shaking as I step off the plane. And what if I can't recognize her among so many people? It's been so long since we have seen each other. I'm such an idiot. How am I not going to recognize my twin sister? Lauri spotted me first. Menchu, Laurita. I shouldn't have worried. It was like we sensed each other even before we saw each other. Our embrace was long and tight. Everything that surrounded us, people, noise, lights, voices, all of it disappeared. For a brief instant, even life itself stopped. We had been inseparable through our childhood and adolescence, and here we were meeting to unveil the mystery of everything that lay behind that wall of water and misunderstandings that had separated Cubans. And yet, for some absurd reason, I couldn't stop thinking about that party long ago where no one asked us to dance. Now, this is a passage from chapter 2 when Laurie's first months in exiles. And she lives with her husband, her brother-in-law who's a child, her father and mother-in-law, the brother of the mother-in-law. We all lived glued to the radio, and we jumped every time the telephone rang. Adela, said the mother-in-law, a pretty woman of 40-something, clumsily played the role of a housewife. She tried to clean the house, do the shopping and laundry, cook, but she really was a disaster. When she didn't burn the rice, it would turn out as hard as a rock. She didn't even know how to fry an egg. One time she was her husband's white underwear with a red shirt of Juancito, and the underwear turned pink. My father-in-law said pink underwear was for faggots, and she better figure out how to get them back as they were, because he wasn't going to wear them like that, and there wasn't any money to buy new ones. Adela cried at heart as if there had been a death in the family. It made me think of the time our dog got lost and Mensch and I were besides ourselves. Papa scolded us and told us that a pet was a pet and a person was a person. I walked over to Adela and patting her on the back said, "Don't worry, Adela, underwear is underwear." But she kept on bowing and answered me by saying, "Yes, but Roberto is Roberto." The one who was always in the best mood was Vidal. Actually, his name wasn't Vidal. It was really Alberto Castaño, but as a youngster, he loved to sing, and they had nicknamed him Vidal after the character from the operetta Luisa Fernanda. Once in Miami, the frustrated baritone took a correspondent course to learn how to fix TVs. He would place his card in the supermarket bulletin board. Vidal fixed television for little money. When someone would call him on the phone, he'd get dressed up as if we're going to a party. He waited until no one was around and steal some cologne from my father-in-law, and he rubbed it in his temples and his dark, thin mustache. He'd return home sweaty, but with $3 in his pocket, which was how much he charged. Even once in a while, he'd have some extra tubes with him when he came back. When Juancito would ask him if those were the ones that had burned out, he'd explain that the tubes were perfectly fine. It was just that when he put the TV back together, he had leftovers and couldn't figure out how they were supposed to go. We would all laugh and thought he was exaggerating until one day an older gentleman who was plump and short of stature came to the house, claimed that Vidal had stolen the tubes from his TV. Vidal gave them back immediately, all the while trying to explain in his thick accent in English. "Sorry, I cannot put back. I cannot put back." One of our favorite pastimes was to go to the airport and watch other Cubans arrive, especially since the numbers started to increase so drastically after the summer of 1960. I will always remember the girls with their headbands, their flared dresses over starched underskirts, the patent leather shoes and white bobby socks, always clutching a doll, and with a terrible look of uncertainty showing in their young faces. The young mothers often wore pearls and carried a clutch-style handbag under the arms. The men all wore suits and dark-rimmed glasses. All the boys reminded me of Peditín, my brother. They all looked like families coming back from church, wearing their Sunday best. In reality, they were refugees who had no idea how drastically their lives were about to change. Then, children started to arrive by themselves. Some of them had signs with an address and phone number hanging from their necks. We never discussed it, but I'm sure it was the sight of those kids that made us stop going to the airport. It hurt too much. Now I'm going to read a passage from Menchu when she's cutting cane. We get up at 4:30 in the morning in order to be in the cane fields by dawn. You have to put on pants, thick boots, long-sleeved shirts, and a hat. Even with all that, the cane leaves still somehow get inside your clothing and scratch up your skin. The heat's unbearable. You never stop sweating. We put a jog aside in the shade of the unending foliage, and the cool water quenches our thirst for a moment. Before noon, when the sun is directly overhead and is hottest, they take us up to a shelter. There they give us something to eat, and then we return to the cane fields 2 hours later. The cane stalks grow tall in an orderly and unswerving line. They extend as far as you can see, slipping over the horizon without end. It's like an infinite ocean, a sea of cane fields. Sometimes, when we're really tired, we sit down and chew on a piece of cane. They say it's terrible for your teeth, but it's sweet and delicious, and it gives us a shot of energy right away. As night falls, we head back to camp, completely exhausted. Despite being dead tired, there are times I just can't fall asleep. Lázaro is in Oriente, Pedritín in Camagüey. It's been months since I've seen them. Papa just retired from his position at the Ministry of Construction, and he and Mama are in Havana, standing in line and taking care of Tania and Ernestico. And meanwhile, I'm here, surrounded by these women who are my comrades, with whom I share a bond of daily living, and yet at the same time, it sometimes seems that we have nothing in common at all. Still, when I see everyone else so excited and dedicated to the work, I can't help but feel the same. If this really were the turning point, if only we were truly building a new and better Cuba for our kids. I don't know why. When I'm far away from Lázaro, I start to have my doubts. I miss you so much, Lauri. We almost never write anymore. I can't imagine what your life must be like. Sometimes it seems like it's just a dream, that our entire childhood of beaches and outings, those Sundays afternoons when we would play Red Rover and hide and seek and free stack and all types of games, and those nights listening to baseball on the radio, and those classrooms where we learned French and we cried while reciting Martí poetry, O Pilar, with your pale and rolling hoop and little pink shoes. That those nights when we would dance on the terrace to the rhythm of cha-cha-cha from the record, Cuando Miñoso batea de verdad. That our entire world, so full of illusions, never really existed, and that the only true reality is this one, this interminable cane harvest that Cuba has become, which sometimes I love and sometimes I hate, and which stings me in the very core of my soul, just like the sharp blades of the sugar cane that cut into my skin. Okay, now I'm gonna read a passage in Spanish, and then Jeffrey's gonna read it in English. It is something that has happened to many of us in exile, which is getting the news of the death of a family member. And this is when Lauri gets the news of her grandmother's death. And she has just talking to her sister and says she had to hang up because she couldn't stop crying. Those who don't understand, please forgive me, but he was going to read it in English afterwards. Also, that way you see how good a job he does with the translation. Lloro porque mi abuela se ha muerto y hace 10 años que no la veía, porque lo supe cuando ya la habían enterrado, porque mientras agonizaba yo estaba en una boda ajena que ella exhalaba su último suspiro. Lloro porque nunca conoció a mis hijos ni les pude enseñar las mismas canciones que a mis hermanas y a mí. Había una vez un barquito chiquitico, había una vez un barquito chiquitico. Lloro por la casa de la sierra con sus canteros de vicarias y croto. Lloro porque ya no veré a Mamaluya despertarse de la siesta, ponerse aquella absurda faja de cordones que sacaba del armario oscuro y su vestido estampado y sentarse en la terraza, los labios recién pitados con aquel color clarito de cotí. Lloro por los cuentos que ya no me hará, porque nunca más oiré su voz, ni oleré su fragancia jazmines, ni sentiré la suavidad de su cutis, ni fijará en mí su mirada azul azul. Lloro porque está muerta, sin moverse, bajo la tierra, en esa tumba que tantas veces visitamos juntas para ponerle flores a mi abuelo, y ni siquiera puedo ir a acompañarla. Lloro por mis padres, y por Mencho, y por Pedritín, y por Eduardo, que vino de Cuba a morir en Vietnam, y está enterrado en Nueva York, donde en el invierno la tierra se cubre de nieve, y no sé si tendrá frío. Lloro porque Johnny tenía que ir al colegio en Miami con la camisa de la Salle y se reían de él, y porque Menchu no quiso venir para mi primer parto, y porque me acaba de decir que Pedro Pablo se parece a nosotros, y porque mi esposo cree que todos los de allá son comunistas. Lloré porque Mamaluya ya no me hará natilla, ni me dejará comer la calientica en la cazuela, ni vendrá a cuidarme cuando me enferme, y porque mi hijo saluda en la escuela otra bandera y canta Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. ¿Por qué no me esperaste, Mamaluya? ¿Por qué cuando regrese no estarás ya en el descanso de la escalera como te vi la última vez? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué estoy aquí, rodeada de inglés por todas partes, cuando en La Habana, esa Habana de luz y consignas, se ha muerto Mamaluya y mi infancia?
In English, I cry because my grandmother has died. I hadn't seen her in 10 years. Because I didn't even find out until after they had buried her. Because as she lay dying, I was at a wedding, not knowing she was exhaling her last breath. I cry because she never met my kids, and she never got the chance to teach them the same lullabies she had taught my sister and me. Songs like, Había una vez un barquito chiquitico. There once was a little bitty boat there was. I cry for her house in La Sierra, with its flower beds of impatiens and caladiums out front, because I will never again see Mama Luya wake up from her nap and put on that absurd girdle with all those ties and ribbons that she would pull out of her armoire, and see her put on her print dress and sit there out back on the terrace with her lips touched up with her light pink Coty lipstick. I cry for the stories that she'll never get to tell me again, because never again will I hear her voice, nor will I smell her fragrance of jasmine, nor will I feel the softness of her skin, nor will she look at me with her steely blue eyes. I cry because she's dead, under the ground, and in the same grave where so often we put flowers for my grandfather, and I can't even go there to be with her. I cry for my parents, and for Menchu, and for Pedritin, and for Julio Eduardo, who came from Cuba to die in Vietnam and is buried in New York, where snow covers his grave in winter. I don't even know if he's cold. I cry because of Miami. Johnny had to go to school wearing the shirts from his LaSalle uniform, and they would laugh at him. And because Menchu didn't want to come for the birth of my first child. Because she just told me that Pedro Pablo looks like us. And because my husband thinks that everyone there is a communist. I cry because Mama Luya will no longer make me pudding and let me eat it warm right out of the pan. Because she won't ever come take care of me again when I'm sick. Because in school, my own child pledges allegiance to another flag. And he sings, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Why didn't you wait for me, Mama Luya? Why won't you be waiting on me in the stairs when I get back, just like you were the day I last saw you when I left? Why? Why am I here surrounded by English everywhere, while in Havana, that city of slogans and lights, you and my innocence have died?
We're going to do 2 more readings. I tell you, when I finished writing that passage, I cried a lot. We're going to read a poem by Raúl Rivero, which is relevant to this passage, and I'm going to read it in Spanish, and he's going to read it in English, and then we're going to read together a dialogue between the 2 sisters, and we'll finish with that. Durante 12 años, abuelo entró en la casa llenándome de espadas y pelotas. Se le veía venir bajo el sombrero blanco como un rey mago que quiere pasar inadvertido, su guayabera de hilo, beige, brillosa, oliendo a caramelo de miel y a bendiciones. A mediodía en punto, comparaba a la familia con una gran manzana y reía que daban ganas de aplaudir, de decir que era fiesta, porque mi madre conspiraba con el fuego. Frente al café, Le crecía la barba, la imaginación. Era olímpico, resuelto, buen amigo, político, sexual. Para mí, el abuelo inventaba la vida, sacando mares, lunas y países de su sombrero blanco. Aún ayer era invencible en su taurete, como si el tiempo fuera una paloma lenta, como si todavía pudiera bostezar, como si no lo hubieran cambiado su sombrero por el poco de tierra que ahora le cubre la cabeza.
For 12 years, grandfather would come into the house and shower me with toys. You could see him coming under his white hat like a wise man who hopes to go by unnoticed, his guayabera made of beige and shiny thread, smelling of honey caramel and of blessings. At 12 o'clock on the dot, he would always say, the family looked more like the neighborhood block. And he laughed as he wanted to applaud and say that it was a party because my mother was conspiring with the stove. Seated in front of the cafe, his beard, his imagination grew. He was Olympic, a good friend, discreet, virile. For me, grandfather invented life, pulling out of his white hat oceans, moons, countries. Just yesterday, he was invincible, seated on his stool, as if time were an unhurried dove, as if he could still yawn, as if they hadn't traded his hat for the bit of dirt that now covers his head.
You know, I'm going to read one paragraph of chapter 12, which is the next to last paragraph, where they meet. So here we're going to pick up. I started reading when Menchu arrives and what she thinks when she meets her sister. Now this is how Lauri narrates meeting her sister at the airport, and then we're going to read together a dialogue that they have in that same chapter. So this is how Lauri narrates the encounter in the Miami airport. I couldn't stop crying as I embraced my sister in the Miami airport. I cried for so many reasons. I ached for never having gone to Tropicana, for the blueness of Varadero, for the death of my father who I said goodbye to forever when I was 18, for my aging mother who maybe I'll never get to see again, for my kid brother who has turned communist, because I even miss the clerk at Casa Suarez with his balding head and spotty hands all the way down to the neon billboard of the woman in her Jansen bathing suit into the sea. Finally, I stepped back so I could see her better. It caught me by surprise how skinny, gray, and old she looked. It was as if someone had magically fast-forwarded the calendar and I was seeing myself 10 years down the road. I immediately started looking for her luggage so she couldn't see my reaction. Then they go through a lot of things in Miami. They do things together and so forth. And then this chapter is narrated by Lauri. So she's narrating and she's talking to her sister. And he will be Menchu and I will be Lauri. I needed my sister to understand what it meant to live outside of one's country. You don't know what it is like to live in exile, what it's like to travel somewhere and when they ask you where you're from, you have to explain that you're from Cuba but you don't reside there. It's like being an orphan. Worse, it's like your parents have abandoned you, that you never had parents, that you don't even have a name.
But at least you've gotten to travel. Sometimes the island itself is like a big prison.
I told her how one of the things that bothered me the most when I first got here was how I would go places, to the movies, shopping, and I wouldn't know anyone. In Columbus, we never even saw a single Cuban. The thing is that here you can work, and you know if you work hard, you can have almost everything you want, except to live in your own country.
You know, Lauri, it just dawned on me that it's the exact opposite in Cuba. There you have the consolation of getting to live in your own country, but you work and you just don't get anywhere.
That's true. But at least your daughter was born and raised in her own country. She got to meet Mama Luya and Papa. Here you try to explain it all to your kids so they'll know their roots, and where they came from, but you never really know if it sinks in. You can never really share with them the things that have been most important to you. They have a different flag, a different anthem, and another language, even if they speak Spanish. Don't get me wrong, I'm really grateful to this country and I admire it, but it'll never be mine. My sister also helped me understand what it means to all of those who stayed behind to have to say so many farewells, something I had never thought about.
Laurina, those of you who left aren't the only ones who long for the old days. Look at all of our old schoolmates that you have here. Marta, Eloise, and I are the only ones of us left. And out of the cousins, only Armandito and Hilda, who died so suddenly. It's true that all of you here nostalgically reminisce about us. But it's different for us. In our mind, you're constantly present. For example, I'm sure you've forgotten about that wall in the patio at Mama Luya's house where you scribbled our names. Well, it's there just like you left it. I see it every day. And Mama doesn't stop talking about you and Ricardo, but more than anything else, really about you.
Both of us had sensed that no matter how much it hurt, there were things we had to get off our chest and tell each other. Oh, Menchu, what happened? How is it possible that we separated for so long?
Life, Lauri. I guess just life.
It wasn't life, Menchu. It was Fidel Castro. It's all his fault.
Oh, let's just drop it.
I just don't get it, Menchu. How is it possible at this stage of the game that Cubans can see that they were wrong?
Lauri, we're not going to get anywhere arguing about it.
We're not arguing.
So what do you want me to say? That I shouldn't have fallen in love with Lázaro because he was a Marxist? That all the hours I spent teaching others to read? That all the cane I cut? That all the schools I designed? That the only place I've ever visited, the Soviet Union? That all the hardships I've endured? That all the sacrifices we made don't amount to anything? That my life hasn't amounted to anything? That the lives of the 12 million Cubans still back there don't amount to anything? That we should just tuck our tail, be humble, and tell all the exiles, we were wrong, dear brothers. You have all the answers. Please come back and save us. Come back with your markets overrun with food. Come on back and teach us all about patriotism with your outdated speeches.
At first I was outraged, but later on I tried to put myself in her shoes and I wound up asking her to forgive me.
It's not a question of forgiveness, Lauri. It's about understanding each other. You haven't done anything to make me mad, but some of the things I've heard here since I've been here, don't all of you realize that for better or worse, that's my life? That's the real Cuba, not the one that all of you have invented?
But that's exactly the worst part. We spent the last 40 years sighing for Cuba, filling our homes with photos of Cuba, with pictures of flamboyanes from Cuba, writing poems about Cuba, composing hymns praising Cuba, and telling our kids stories dealing with Cuba, fooling ourselves that the country isn't devouring us, thinking about Cuba day and night, always listening for news about Cuba, creating a Casa Cuba wherever there's a Cuban community, feeling like we're strangers in a foreign land everywhere we go. And now you come out and tell me that we don't even have the right to have an opinion about it? We don't belong in either place. We're not going to, not here, not there. We're scum.
Now you're the one exaggerating. In fact, you're the ones that have it all. Just look at this beautiful house you have.
Oh, man, should be serious. This house is a pile of crap. What the hell does it matter if you have a house when you don't have a homeland? I don't have a country. Don't you get it? I've loved Cuba, but it doesn't love me back. Oh, just so you know, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you know which are the exiles that are welcomed with open arms? The most recent ones, the ones who have already made a name for themselves in Cuba, the ones who until yesterday were part of the Cuban government, the ones who get their kicks writing about the conditions there. Because, hey, poverty sells, sex sells, wagging your tail on stage sells, beating drums sells. But what about all the dead and the prisoners and the ones that have drowned, the ones like Robertico who never made it, and all the anonymous exiles and my sons, who are Americans but not really, the ones who have names like Fernandez and dark hair? What about them? No one wants to think about them. They don't matter.
Listen to you. You would have thrown those ideas right back in Robertico's face if he had said all of that.
Yeah, but in some ways, he was right.
We're all right in some ways, but no one has all the answers.
if I had only one wish for Cuba, you know what it would be? That no Cuba would ever have to live in exile. Never, Menchu. Never again.
You know what I would do? I would make all goodbyes illegal. There'd be no more farewells.
Thank you. Now we're open to questions, comments. Don't throw tomatoes.
Can you say something about the experience of translating the novel into a play, and the experience of doing the play in Venezuela?
About translating the novel?
Performing it, rather.
About the play?
Adapting it.
Well, I really thought that there was a play and a movie. See, I still think there's a movie here. I wrote the play. I was kind of too close to the novel then, and I gave it to some friends here in the theater. Nobody paid any attention to it, and so I forgot about it. And then in the fall of 2013, a friend of a friend, no, a lady I didn't know, who by the recommendation of a friend, read the novel. She was here in the States. She lives in Venezuela. She's a theater director, and she loved the novel, and she got in contact with me and wanted to adapt it to a theater. And I told her I had already adapted it, but that the adaptation needed work. So I sent it to her, and she worked it, and she was in Carolinas with her daughter, and we talked and emailed each other for about a week or 10 days. And when she left, she had a script, and she kept me, she shows the actresses, and she kept me, sent me pictures, and told me about the rehearsals. And in the middle of the rehearsals, the student protest started, and I had already bought my ticket to go, and I told them, if you put the play, I'll be there. And they opened it March 31st of last year, in the middle of all the student protests, and I went, and it was really incredible to see my characters come to life. And I saw 4 of the, and it was at the University Andrés Bello, especially the 2 times I was during the daytime. It was full of students. They were sitting, it was a pretty large theater. They were sitting in the steps, they were sitting, I have pictures with them sitting in front of me, and they were crying, and they were Venezuelans. There were no Cubans in the audience, or very few. And the colloquiums after the play were unbelievable. And they would take out their T-shirts that they were going to wear, that they were going to go and protest. And then after I left, they kept the critics in the reviews in the newspapers were excellent. And after that, I produced it here. I had done things like that before, but with FIU's support, and this I did by myself, and it was a lot of work. But because, do a contract with the theaters, selling the tickets, getting them printed. But I got a support from my friends. I sent emails, said, I need you to buy the tickets ahead of time because I need the money, because I have to put the deposit in the theater, and the checks kept coming in, and I kept going to the bank and making, But it was very successful, and, we actually made a little money, which I sent to the group, as I told them I would. And then with that and another contribution, they took the play to a festival in Chile, where it was also successful. And now in April, they're going to have it for 3 more weekends in Caracas. And we're hoping to take it to the festival, international festival in Havana in October. We'll see. Wow. We'll keep you posted. We did launch this book here at the book fair in November. And we just launched it at the book fair in Havana last month. Jeffrey and I were there. I had we read this same dialogue that we read to you now. And the part that says about Fidel Castro, in Spanish, it's hard. Dice, Fidel Castro, ese hombre no paga. And when I saw myself, and it was packed, people standing like here. And I said, I'm going to read this like this. Or, because I could have changed it and say, son las ideologías que separan a la familia, but I said, no, I wrote it this way, I'm going to read. And I heard like a room of approval in the audience, or laughter or nervousness, you know. But when we finished, people stood up and applauded us, really. It was, and people were crying, and it was a very important experience, because if it's, as the professor said today, if the book has a poetics of reconciliation, then the message has to arrive to get to Cuba too, you know. And so to be able to have done that at the book fair in Havana was an important step that I wouldn't have thought possible when I wrote it in 2002, when it was first came out. We've left you without.
You might present it again in Miami?
The play? Yeah. I hope so. There's always a chance. I don't think I can possibly go through producing it myself again. But since it's been successful, maybe I can get now a sponsor from FIU or from Miami-Dade, or, you know, if I get...
I was asking also because, I mean, there are groups, you know, I have a friend who is a colleague and a translator also, but she's also an actress, and she's involved with Prometeo or another...
Yeah, I know a lot of people in the theater. I have... I don't know if it's a quality or it's a fault, but I'm a very loyal person. And because I gave this play to many directors in Miami, nobody paid attention. I have wanted this lady to run with the play by herself for some time. It doesn't mean forever, but I've wanted her to be able to do that. And we are going to work in sometime in the next year or two in publishing also in a bilingual edition, which is kind of easy because it's, you know, it's mainly from the book, so it's a lot of cut and paste and some adaptation and so forth, and so that it will be available for theater groups at you know, to whenever they want to do it. But I want her to give her some time to do it by herself.
Do you ever feel that the character that came to the United States ever becomes American in their soul, or will they just stay Cuban?
This character, which is not all the Cubans who came to this state, never becomes truly American. But that doesn't happen to all the Cubans. I think there are many circumstances. I think it depends how old you are. It depends how rooted your family is in Cuba, what's your history, what you dedicate yourself to. For example, I don't know, I think that writers have like a double exile, because your homeland is your language. Now, when you are rooted for your country and you change languages and you've always wanted to be a writer, then, you know, that and it's not only the language, it's the culture, that people that surround you, the people who read you, your natural readers. So this character, which is loosely based on myself, never becomes truly American. Now I think, for example, there are other people with other professions that can fulfill themselves better. I mean, I imagine that a doctor, you know, a stomach is a stomach and a heart is a heart. And, you know, whether the heart feels in English or Spanish, it's the same. And I imagine that a doctor can fulfill, you know, his lifelong dream. But that's what happens to this character, but it's not a universal truth.
What about the movie, Uma? What, did you get any interest?
Well, right now, Andy Garcia is reading the novel, and I have the novel. I left it in Cuba with a young director. I really would prefer somebody, and I'm going to be meeting a young woman director from Chile in May. So I don't know what will come out of all these meetings. My preference would be to have a young Cuban director in Cuba do it. That would be my preference, because I think then the novel would come full circle. if I write it from the diaspora and from exile, and somebody of a younger generation in Cuba makes it into a movie, then I think the novel fulfills its purpose. But que será, será. We'll see. It's been a long story with this novel. It started as a short story based on something that the painter Mijares told me one Friday night in his little apartment here on Douglas. And that short story, it was called Round Trip, was very successful, and it was translated. It was in an anthology in London and so forth. And then that came to the novel, and it was published in 2002. And then I was the first Cuban to publish an ebook in 2010, and now had the play, and now the bilingual edition. So I'm going to have faith that the movie's going to happen sometime. If it's not, right away, it'll be sometime. And I also hope that someday, not too far away, it will be published in Cuba.
We have time for one more question. One more?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for the book and for bringing the story of Cubans to a greater sense of consciousness. And recently I went to Cuba for the first time in my life. I was born here. And I'm enamored by my own roots. And so when you were speaking of this desire for the next generation to have known where they come from, I never knew where I came from really until I stepped foot on Cuban soil. And so when we talk about reconciliation, I'm really interested in how we bring this story to my generation and to people who are younger than me still, to reconcile not just the diaspora and the Cuban nationals, but to reconcile a Cuban identity that is fragmented by so much misunderstanding. And I wonder if you could comment on that type of reconciliation.
Well, all I can, that would require a long answer, but all I can do as a writer is write about identity, write novels where the characters are different part of that fragmented identity, and yet they all have a common ground. I think there are things that you don't teach in the classroom that they have to come about in different ways, and my way of contributing is through writing. And I imagine that there are other people that can contribute in many other ways. But what I have learned also is that the world has changed a lot, and in this global world, all identities are fragmented, so that our case is not as unique as we used to think. And it's the reality of our century, these fragmented identities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Folks, I'd like to thank Mr. Dwani for doing that great introduction, Professor Barnett from the university, and of course, Mr. Aragón for this wonderful book. It is bilingual, so you don't have an excuse if you don't speak one language or the other to buy it. We have it for sale at the counter. If you're watching online, give us a call here at the store. We'll get one autograph for you, and we'll ship it to you. Again, thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening.